The 2026 FIFA World Cup was supposed to be the most watched, most attended, most celebrated football tournament in human history. A 40-18 field, 16 host cities, 3 countries, over 100 matches. FIFA's own president called the demand so overwhelming it was like 1,000 years of World Cups at once. That's not a marketing slogan. That's what Gianni Infantino actually said, out loud, with a straight face. So here's what's strange. Here's what doesn't quite add up. With the tournament just days away, kicking off on June 11th in Mexico City, the numbers on the ground are telling a very different story. Hotels in host cities are sitting with empty rooms. Thousands of tickets were mysteriously pulled from FIFA's official website with no explanation. And in some cities, bookings are running below what they normally look like on a regular summer weekend. Not a World Cup weekend, a regular one. How does the biggest football tournament in history end up facing questions about whether enough fans actually showed up? That's what we're going to break down today, because this story has layers, and it matters not just for this tournament, but for what FIFA decides to do next. So what is actually going on here? Let's start with the basics. The 2026 FIFA World Cup runs from June 11th to July 19th, spanning 39 days across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. 11 American cities are hosting 78 of the 104 matches. The final takes place at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey on July 19th, one of the largest stadium finishes in World Cup history. On paper, this should have been an easy sell. The United States alone has over 300 million people. Add Canada and Mexico, and you're talking about a continent-sized fan base with football deeply embedded in the culture at every level. The infrastructure was ready. The stadiums were built. The broadcast deals were signed. FIFA projected the tournament would drive over $30 billion in total economic output, but as the weeks counted down to kickoff, something wasn't adding up. Survey after survey, city after city. The hospitality industry started sounding the alarm. The American Hotel and Lodging Association, which represents hotels across all 11 U.S. host cities, released a report that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. Nearly 80% of hotels surveyed said bookings were tracking below their initial forecasts. Not slightly below, significantly below. In Kansas City, occupancy rates for June and July were lagging behind what the city normally sees on a standard summer month. In Seattle, a hotel general manager reported that June occupancy was running 7% below the same period last year. Think about that for a second. The World Cup is here, and some host city hotels are doing worse than they did without it. FIFA, for its part, has maintained that over 5 million tickets have been sold and that interest is strong across all matches. But the AHLA pointed out the obvious disconnect. Strong ticket sales haven't translated into strong hotel bookings. And for a tournament of this size, one where FIFA itself estimated 6 million fans would attend, those two numbers need to move together. So where's the gap coming from? Here's where things get interesting. When you look at what's driving the lower than expected turnout from international fans, a few clear factors keep coming up. The first is pricing. And not just ticket pricing. The entire cost structure of attending this World Cup has become a serious point of friction. FIFA introduced dynamic pricing for the first time in World Cup history. That's the same model airlines and hotels use, where prices rise based on demand. In theory, it sounds reasonable. In practice, it's been a nightmare for fans. Reports indicate that ticket prices for many U.S. host city matches increased by as much as 100% between October 2025 and April 2026 alone. FIFA initially sold the most expensive tickets for the final at $6,730, already dramatically higher than the roughly $1,600 price for the most expensive tickets at the 2022 Qatar World Cup. By the time dynamic pricing kicked into full gear, the cheapest resale ticket for the final on secondary platforms was being listed at nearly $8,000, with seats closer to the pitch going for over $12,000 for a fan flying in from South America, Africa, or Asia, where football cultures are among the deepest in the world. That's simply not accessible. Football Supporters Europe formally complained to the European Commission about the pricing. They described the situation as an aggressive and exploitative ticketing policy that FIFA had refused to address after months of appeals from fan groups. The complaint was filed alongside consumer group Euroconsumers, and it represents something we don't see often: a coordinated, formal, institutional response from football's own supporter organizations against FIFA's commercial decisions. Then there's the ticketing process itself, which has generated its own controversy entirely separate from the prices. In early June, just days before the tournament was set to begin, FIFA accidentally sold dozens of tickets for $0. You read that right. Tickets for group stage matches in Toronto were processed at no charge, and FIFA gave affected fans 7 days from June 3rd to complete payment or risk having their tickets cancelled. At the exact same time, thousands of tickets that had been visible on FIFA's official website suddenly disappeared without explanation. Estimates from ticketdata.com suggest that around 44,000 tickets vanished from the platform in a single weekend at the start of June, dropping available inventory from roughly 74,000 to under 30,000 with no announcement, no statement, no clarity. And then came the reports in the Times, published June 3rd, claiming that FIFA may have been quietly routing unsold low-demand tickets through unofficial resale platforms, potentially to avoid having to compensate fans who had already paid face value for the same seats. This is the kind of chaos that erodes trust, and trust, once gone, is very hard to rebuild in the 5 days you have left before opening kickoff. But there's another angle here that goes beyond ticket prices and website errors. The 2026 World Cup is being held at a moment when international travel to the United States carries more uncertainty than it has in decades. Fans from many countries who would normally plan a trip to see their national teams play had to factor in a visa landscape that was anything but predictable. The US State Department earlier this year paused immigrant visa processing from 75 countries, including some of the world's biggest football nations. Even fans with valid non-immigrant visas were warned they'd face strict vetting. Brazil, Nigeria, countries with hundreds of millions of football fans who were already stretching their budgets to cover the ticket prices, the flights, the hotels. The result: international visitors who historically stay longer and spend more than domestic tourists stayed away in larger numbers than anyone had projected. The AHLA report specifically cited fewer than expected international travelers as a primary reason hotels were underperforming. This matters because overseas fans are the engine of the economic boom host cities were counting on. Some cities have been partially insulated. Miami and Atlanta are reportedly seeing stronger demand, likely driven by larger Latin American diaspora communities and easier domestic travel. But for cities in the Midwest and Pacific Northwest cities like Kansas City, Seattle, and Dallas, the picture has been much harder. The situation got stark enough that Arlington, Texas, which is hosting the most World Cup matches of any U.S. city at AT&T Stadium, saw its convention bureau directly acknowledge that demand was slower than expected, citing what they described as anti-US sentiment among international fans as a contributing factor. This matters because it points to something FIFA can't solve with a press release. When the perception of a host country shifts, it shifts the whole travel calculation. Fans weigh not just the cost of the ticket, but whether the trip itself feels welcoming. Now let's step back and think about what makes 2026 different from tournaments that came before it. The 2018 World Cup in Russia faced its own skepticism in the lead-up, geopolitical concerns, predictions of low attendance, warnings about foreign fans, and then the tournament began, and those fears largely evaporated. The stadiums filled. The atmosphere was electric. Football had a way of cutting through the noise. The 2022 World Cup in Qatar was in many ways the most controversial tournament FIFA had ever staged. Human rights concerns, the move to winter dates, the extreme heat every week brought a new criticism. And yet, once it began, the football dominated the conversation. The crowds showed up. The matches delivered, so it's fair to ask, will 2026 follow the same pattern? Will the coverage of empty hotel rooms and ticketing scandals fade the moment the first ball is kicked in Mexico City? Maybe. Football has a remarkable ability to recapture attention, but there's a distinction worth drawing here. In Russia and Qatar, the concerns were largely external to football, political and ethical questions that didn't directly affect whether a fan could afford to go to a game. In 2026, the barriers are financial and logistical in ways that directly hit the person trying to plan the trip. When dynamic pricing turns a $1,600 seat into a $7,000 seat between the time you registered your interest and the time you tried to buy, that's a structural issue with how FIFA sold this tournament, not just an optics problem. That fan who wanted to go didn't stop wanting to go. They just got priced out, and that's the bigger issue. FIFA has always been criticized for how it manages money, but this tournament represented an opportunity to show that the expanded format minus 48 teams, 3 countries, more games, more storylines, would also mean more access for more fans. The reality, at least for international fans, appears to have been the opposite. Now think about what this means for the players and the fans who are there. The on-pitch story for 2026 is genuinely extraordinary. 48 national teams, matches spanning from Toronto to Los Angeles, from Dallas to Vancouver. The group stage alone will produce results and upsets across 6 weeks of football. Players who spent years building toward this moment, their one chance, maybe their only chance, at a World Cup, will take the field regardless of how the hotel industry is performing. And for the fans who are there, particularly the domestic crowd and the diaspora communities who could reach the host cities by car or short flight, the experience is going to be memorable. The fan zones, the local watch events, the energy that builds around a World Cup in your own backyard, that doesn't disappear because an AHLA survey painted a grim picture. The atmosphere at a World Cup, once it starts, is something that's very hard to replicate anywhere else in football. the mix of cultures, languages, national colors, even at partial capacity. These stadiums will carry something special, but there's a quieter disappointment underneath that. Some of the supporters who have the deepest football cultures in the world, fans from African nations, South American countries, Asian footballing powers, are watching from home this time. Not because they don't care, because they were priced out or kept out. And that absence will be felt, even if it's invisible on camera. So what happens from here? What does the bigger picture look like as we move into the tournament itself? In the best case scenario, the football takes over. The group stage produces the drama it almost always does. Last-minute goals, shock upsets, fan parks fill up, last-minute bookings surge as people who were waiting on the sidelines, hoping for price drops, watching resale markets, decide to make the trip after all. Some analysts have noted that fans may have been deliberately holding off, anticipating that prices would fall closer to the tournament. If that's true, the next 2 weeks could see a correction in hotel bookings in a more realistic scenario. The international attendance gap doesn't fully close. Some matches, particularly lower profile, group games between nations without large diaspora communities in the US will have visible empty patches. The economic windfall some host cities were expecting won't fully materialize, at least not from foreign visitors, and FIFA's ticketing practices will likely face formal consequences regardless of how the football plays out. The New York and New Jersey attorneys general have launched a joint investigation into whether FIFA's sales tactics violated consumer protection laws. California already sent a formal letter raising concerns about misleading practices. The possibility of class action lawsuits from fans has been raised. These are legal processes that will continue long after the final whistle in New Jersey. FIFA's response, so far, has been to defend its pricing model as appropriate for the American market and to continue celebrating the milestone of 5 million tickets sold. Whether that position holds under legal scrutiny is another question entirely. What FIFA decides to do with dynamic pricing going forward, whether it becomes the new normal for all World Cups or gets walked back after 2026, is genuinely consequential. The next 2 tournaments will involve different hosts' contexts, different fan demographics, different cost structures. How FIFA frames what happened in 2026 will shape how it approaches those decisions. Let me bring this back to what matters most. The 2026 World Cup is 5 days away. The football is happening. 48 nations are going to compete. Players who have prepared their entire careers for this moment are ready to go. And for all the noise around ticketing, pricing, hotel bookings, and legal investigations, this tournament will still produce the moments that define careers and shift conversations. But the story of how FIFA got here, the pricing decisions, the website chaos, the disconnect between tickets sold and fans actually arriving, is one worth paying attention to. Because it's not just about 2026. It's about what the World Cup is for. It's about who it's supposed to be accessible to. It's about whether the biggest football event on the planet is something that brings fans closer to the game, or builds walls between them. Dynamic pricing, unexplained inventory changes, a $7,800 cheapest available final ticket. These aren't small details, and fans noticed. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think this is a temporary bump that the football itself will smooth over the moment it kicks off? Or do you think FIFA has permanently changed how a section of football's global fan base relates to the World Cup. Priced out, kept out, frustrated enough to watch from the couch? Drop your take in the comments. And if you're heading to a match this summer, whether that's in Dallas, Toronto, LA, or Mexico City, tell us about it. Because for all the criticism, the fans who are there are going to see something genuinely historic. If you haven't already, hit subscribe. We're covering this entire tournament, every angle, every controversy, every storyline, right here. And if this video gave you something to think about, give it a like. It helps more people find this kind of coverage. This story is still developing. The tournament hasn't even started yet. And as always, football never stays quiet for long. See you in the next one.